Let's open up the Black Series 6-inch scale figure of the iconic Biker Scout from Return of the Jedi. Varykino. If it's Star Wars, we collect it. Hello there, thanks for visiting Varykino. We're coming up on nearly 2 years since we celebrated the 40th anniversary of Return of the Jedi in 2023, so it seems that is about the time that New Zealand stores are trying to clear out all of the older stock. So we've been going around and making use of all of those fantastic sales by picking up some fantastic Return of the Jedi Black Series figures that are missing from our collection. Now typically I don't like to open up the anniversary carded figures with these cool Kenner inspired backing cards, but for a lot of the Return of the Jedi Black Series figures in particular, we've never been able to find them in their standard Black Series older style packaging. So of course when they hit clearance, they've been banging around store shelves for 2 years. They're generally a little bit more banged up and not really worthwhile keeping mint, so I don't feel too bad about opening them up, and I've never been able to find this one in any other packaging style, and I really want to add the iconic Biker Scout to my loose Black Series figure collection, so I'm so excited to finally pick this one up on sale, ready to open. So thanks so much for hanging out with me today. Coming up really soon, I'll get the figure out of the packaging so we can take a closer look at all of the details, but first let's take a quick look at the backing card. For the 40th anniversary since the release of Return of the Jedi, Hasbro released a collection of Black Series 6-inch figures with packaging heavily inspired by the original Kenner action figures from the 1980s. I have a vintage Kenner backing card here for a side-by-side comparison. They are both rectangular in shape with a black background. We have the Star Wars logo at the top with a thin chrome racetrack design surrounding the movie logo here in red. We also have a slender chrome racetrack design surrounding the character art to the right of the figure. I really like the fact that the modern Hasbro version here keeps the same promotional image as used on the original Kenner backing cards, though of course in the modern version they have tidied up the image quality a little bit, so it just reads a little bit clearer than the original version. For the character nameplate, it is that vibrant green on both backing cards, and the font is in black with the text Biker Scout. I like the fact that Hasbro has kept the same nameplate as the original Kenner backing card, because on some figures it is also known as a Scout Trooper, but I like the nod to the original Kenner figure here. We also have that green accent color used and behind the figure on both cards. In the clear bubble on the front of the backing card, we have a clear plastic tray holding the figure in place. We have one Biker Scout action figure and one blaster pistol included. Moving on to the back of the backing card now, we have a black background with the iconic Star Wars logo here at the top, this time with a double chrome racetrack design surrounding promotional product photography of other figures from this Return of the Jedi anniversary collection. We have Boba Fett, Lando Calrissian, Han Solo, Princess Leia, Wicket, and this figure, the Biker Scout. We have a short blurb about this anniversary collection here. Commemorate the 40th anniversary of Star Wars Return of the Jedi with figures from the Black Series featuring classic design and packaging, and that's repeated in a few different languages. We also have that extended chrome racetrack design surrounding that little blurb there. The rest of the packaging is barcode, copyright warning, all of that kind of stuff. Of course, the real highlight of the anniversary packaging is the front. I really love that nostalgic nod to the original Kenner, and it's kind of fun seeing it blown up in the larger Black Series 6-inch scale. This one has a little bit of damage, so I'm not too worried about opening it because I really want to add the Biker Scout to my lineup of Return of the Jedi Black Series figures, so let's open it up. So now I have my Black Series 6-inch Biker Scout figure out of the packaging finally, as well as the included blaster pistol accessory. So let's jump in and check out the details. So of course, the Biker Scout is actually quite an old Black Series figure, first released in the line in 2014 with an included speeder bike vehicle. I don't have that one, so of course I was so excited to finally add this Return of the Jedi figure to my Black Series lineup, because of course troopers are just very popular here in New Zealand. They always get snatched up, and I've wanted to add the standard one to my collection, though of course even though this particular figure was released in 2023, it is a re-release of that older figure, so we are going to be looking at the older Articulation, particularly the ones I don't like, the 2 pins in the arms and the legs. We also have an older style at the neck as well, but as much as I would like Hasbro to re-release this with with new tooling and refreshed sculpting. I'm just happy to finally have this one in my collection because, of course, I love Return of the Jedi and it is just so iconic from that film. I really wanted this figure for my lineup. I thought it was interesting getting it out of the packaging for the first time because I haven't, seen this one out of the box before. But I thought it was interesting. The first thing that really caught my eye was the fact that we've got quite a lot of weathering going all the way up to the elbows. Everything looks quite black and white from the top half up. We've got just a little bit of yellow weathering on the chest. Most of the weathering is on the knees and boots here. I wasn't expecting to see that sort of yellow tone up here at the elbow pads here as well, because I often remark that a lot of times Hasbro is quite good at doing weathering and antiquing down the front of the figures, and the backs tend to get a little bit forgotten. So I thought it was really interesting to see that sort of yellow weathering tone that we kind of see here on the knee plates being also used on the elbow pads, completely hidden when it's in the packaging. It's one of those fun things about, finally getting your figures out of the bubbles. I do appreciate a really nice mint on card figure, but you do miss a lot of the detail on the back. So this is going to be fun. Okay, let's go over the sculpting and paintwork. Then we'll check out the articulation and try out the included accessory. So of course, they have such interesting helmets, so iconic and so different to a lot of the other Imperial helmets we see in the original trilogy era. So we've got the white helmet with many colors used for the details here. We've kind of got a mid-gray for sort of on the nose. We've got that looks like a black for the stripes above the black visor. We've got black and gray around the mouth breather area here. We've got black and gray on the side details and a little bit more black on the back with these stripe details. So of course this one is probably in the sort of more photorealistic era of printing, but he doesn't have a face underneath his helmet, so we're not really going to see a lot of painting difference compared to the original version. I've got to say the stripes above the visor on mine are just a little bit not quite straight. They're sort of touching on the lip just above the black visor here. I think I'd prefer it if they were just a little bit higher, perhaps just a shade straighter. But I gotta say, I can't be too picky. I did get this one on clearance with a bit of a damaged card. If there was a better version, I'm sure somebody did the side-by-side comparison in the store and got that one. But once I add them to display, those very, very tiny little paint irregularities completely disappear with the sort of awesomeness of finally having this figure in my collection. I do really like, when they get these intricate painted details nice and straight. You can see that would be almost impossible trying to paint that to detail by hand. And those black stripes there on the back, they're so close together it almost looks like a single block of black, but those are individual stripes there. The black little details in the recessed sculpted detail here is pretty well lined up to the actual recessed sculpted areas, which is quite nice, and the little grey circles does line up with the sculpting. There's just a very subtle little sculpted circle that's kind of the hinge for when this visor would flip up on screen. The visor does not move. It's not a separate articulating piece on this particular figure, but I like that we've still got that sort of little detail printed there. Looks very nice. Everything's looking pretty straight, pretty nice on the helmet. It's not a face per se, but of course you do put a lot of focus on the helmets of Imperial, so I just really want to make sure that everything's looking good. There's maybe, it's just a little bit of cardboard fluff just sitting on the visor. Sometimes when I'm looking through the plastic of a figure, I'm not sure if something is like a mark or just a little bit of, little bit of residue, a little bit of dust or something from the factory. There was a little thing on the visor. I was a little bit worried it was perhaps a scratch on the black gloss of the visor, but it was just a bit of dust and that wiped off. Thank goodness. That looks really nice. I like the visor. It kind of looks like cool sunglasses. It kind of gives it like a cool biker vibe because they are biker scouts, which I quite like. So the top half of the figure, very black and white, but I do like the fact that we've got a little bit of this sort of yellow, little bit of weathering on the chest here. It just kind of gives them a little bit more of a worn, because they're not, you don't really see them in sort of the shiny Death Star corridors. We see them out in the field on Endor. So I like the fact that it's just giving a little bit of accenting to these raised sections here on the chest sculpting. We've got a tiny little black printing in this recessed detail here. Very nice and lined up. And then on the back, we've got this really sort of interesting little extra bit on the back of the Biker Scout. It's kind of not really a backpack, but that's kind of what it always is called in my head. So we've got this sculpted on. It's not a separate piece. You don't have to worry about it sort of falling off. Some backpacks, jetpacks of some Black Series figures, I find they have a tendency to sort of come off very easily. Very glad to see this one is fully sculpted, so I'm not going to knock it off. And we've got some really nice detail on the top there with that black and red accenting that sculpted detail. And we've also got a recessed line here, painted black. Very nice. I don't see much in the terms of wiggles with the paint because that is a thin line, and then we've also got some fine black horizontal stripes here as well, so that's looking really nice. This does look like this is made out of white plastic over the black used for the Biker Scout undersuit, but there are some places where that continues on. So this upper arm section, this looks like, I want to say this is separate because I can kind of look under and that looks like white plastic attached over the black plastic used for the upper arm. But this section, the sort of back armor here on the sort of upper arm, this strap is sculpted on part of the figure and this part here as well. But you can see that this piece of armor here, this is painted white, trying to sort of cover up the black plastic. So it has just a slightly different sort of white color and sheen to the white plastic used in other areas, but it's towards the back of the figure. You're not really going to see it, and it's a pretty good job. Sometimes white really stands out. It's just more of a cream or an off-white compared to the stark white of plastic. It's doing a pretty good job. We've also got the extra little black details painted on here, which just sort of help disguise it there a little bit. And I think it's just so interesting that we've got such a yellow sort of weathering here for these elbow pads, which we don't really have a strap or anything sort of attached them across the front. You can see because we've got this unfortunate cutout here because of the 2-pin articulation on the arms. I really do wish that maybe someday Hasbro will go back and refresh this figure with new articulation, just because it's sort of, you lose so much detail with this style of articulation there. It just really bites in, and we just don't really have anything on the front of the arms. I know it's different if he was on a bike, his arms would sort of be gripping somewhere else and we're not really going to be seeing this down the front, but because I'm going to have my figure sort of standing without his vehicle, I'm just going to notice this a little bit more. I'm hoping I'm going to get him sort of arms up with a small blaster pistol pose, because I don't like the way that we get this cut in here at the elbows. I do go on a little bit about this older articulation just because I love the new one so much, and so I'm always, wanting Hasbro to sort of take that on board and, give the new articulation style to each figure that they release. But of course, I know this is a popular figure. People are going to be buying it regardless of whether it has that older articulation style. Fingers crossed someday. Now for the rest of the arms, it is just plain black, but that is keeping with the figure. So we've got sort of like these sort of gauntlet style gloves where we've got the sculpted detail on the back of the hand. We've got these sort of stripes across the leather there and a little bit of detail. So no paintwork really to speak of there. You can see that we've got some nice side to side articulation there at the sort of side. So that hand's going to go side to side, and we have, it looks like the same style on the other hand. So we're going to get some side to side hand action. And even though these are sort of thick gloves in the costume, we've got quite a nice definition between the hand and that forearm armor, forearm section there. So I'm hoping we're going to get some really cool movement, because sometimes even when Hasbro gives us this extra sort of level of articulation, it can be sort of limited. You get these little tiny wiggles. I'm hoping that we'll get some cool movements there. Good looking arms, just those elbows there that I'm not fond of. So moving on to the waist, I quite like the weathering that they've done on this. So of course it kind of has a stitched cummerbund instead of a hard armor plate like we see on Stormtroopers in the original trilogy, because these guys have to sort of crouch down a little bit in sort of the riding the speeder bike position. So torso armor through here would be fairly uncomfortable. So we've got this sort of quilted fabric sort of cummerbund section. You can see it sort of wrinkling here in the back, but for this figure Hasbro has given it sort of a light grey wash, which I think is really quite fun. It just kind of adds in a little bit of detail, sort of brings out that sculpted detail, and it kind of, you can see all the sort of fabric wrinkles, which I quite like, and that continues on to the back here as well. I think that that's really quite fun. And then on, of course, over the top, we've got two great pouches, which do look like they're painted pretty well. I think these are part of the sculpt. I don't know. If they're separate pieces joined on, they are a really tight fit. You can sort of see there doesn't look like there's a big gap between them, but it's hard to say because they're just so sort of fused on. I don't think they would come off if I tried, but I do like them there. Okay, so we've got a white belt, we've got the pouches. It looks like the belt and this section are made out of the more flexible rubbery plastic, because of course I don't want this to limit the thighs, because if I had a speeder bike vehicle, we want to be able to sort of get him into a seated position quite well, so these need to move. So you can see that is going to be rubbery. Of course, we're not really going to get much movement in this belt front section here, but we do have that sort of black strap coming between the legs and attaching to the back of the belt here, where we have that sort of interesting it's not the same as the thermal detonator on the back of a stormtrooper belt, but that's kind of what it reminds me of. We've kind of got this box here with the sort of extended little sort of tubes, white edges. You can see the painting is pretty well lined up with the sculpting detail here in the back as well. The tubes are kind of a little bit flat against the belt. They don't look like they're sort of 3D or that they will flex away from the belt. They're a little bit flat towards the back, but it does the job. And we've got some painted details here kind of creating the buckles on the belt, though of course that paintwork is just on the top. If I look at sort of the cross section down the side, that black paint doesn't sort of completely go down the sides, which if this was a black buckle, it would be sort of black in a 360-degree notion there, but the cross sections are white. But if I'm looking straight on, I'm not really going to notice that too much. So that's a pass. I don't mind that too much. Now for the rest of the pants, we've just got black. It eats up the light. It's hard to see the detail a little bit here, but we can see it's kind of got like the fabric texture over the sculpting of the pants, and we've got this horizontal sort of strapping here, sort of cutting across at the front of the thighs, and we see that we do have a thigh swivel for articulation. Now the knees on this particular figure don't look so bad when he's standing straight up, and I don't actually mind the 2-pin articulation style on the knees of this Biker Scout figure as much as other figures. Don't get me wrong, it's not my favorite, but because it's not really cutting through crucial detail here and black on black, it's actually doing a pretty good job of hiding, especially when viewed from the front, because we've got knee plate armor that is hiding a lot of that sort of articulation there, and I can barely make out the pegs to the side. You really got to actually look up close, because the peg here is not cutting through the top of the boots. It's just in the black sort of the fabric pants, again here at the top as well, so it's doing a pretty good job. You do still get that sort of slightly more awkward cutout here in the back like we do at the elbows, but it's on the back. I'll always give Hasbro a pass for sort of, you know, we have to have articulation somewhere, so it's going to sort of cut into the back, and the black hides everything really well. So yeah, it's actually just more the elbows that bother me about the sort of older articulation style, because everything just kind of works here. I really like these knees, and some of the older versions of this figure did include sort of weathering around the boots, but it kind of ended a bit abruptly. There's something about, you know, even though the articulation is still the older style, Hasbro has really made some fantastic improvements with the way that they approach the printing, painting, and weathering of their figures. So I gotta say, having seen some of the older versions of this figure online during my hunting, I wasn't a fan of the way that they had done the painting. It kind of stopped. This one, the weathering goes all the way to the top of the boots and continues through the knee pads here as well. And it's kind of, I don't think this is digitally printed. This looks like it is hand done. It's kind of got a brushed effect on the knees, like it's done sort of almost like still a little bit wet, but not sort of dripping wet. It's a little bit heavier on this knee compared to this knee, and I like that. Weathering wouldn't be, you know, perfectly consistent across. You know, you're going to get grubby in varying ways. And then you can see at the boots, it looks like it's done more wet because it's kind of pulled into the sort of sculpted creases on the boots, which I absolutely love. It gives it a wet mud look, which is just fantastic. Like somebody went and tromped their Black Series figure around in their backyard and just left it to dry. I think that looks really fun. And it's varied, you know, it's not the same both sides, which I think is fun. of course, we've got the holster attached on the right boot where we're really picking up more weathering around that. I do have to say the articulation at the ankles, because, you know, they're a little bit white, because if we're going to move the ankles, that is a part where we're going to get just a little bit sort of scratching. And you can see already that the articulating point on this one is already a little bit more cleaner than the surrounding areas, because of course we're going to sort of get a little bit of movement, and that gets a little bit more exposed, which is a little bit of a shame. On this one, it's not quite as clean, a little bit, but not quite as clean on this one. That's like the one little thing about the weathering on this one. If he was on a speeder bike and the boot was more sort of in this position on the pedal, I wouldn't see that at all. So that's just a little bit unfortunate. If I'm going to be standing him straight, I'm going to see that. Now, I do mention, you know, you can always go in and sort of add weathering to figures, touch things up. I am not that brave. I generally keep my figures as is, how they come out of the packaging. So that is just a tiny little thing for me. But I do notice that weathering often doesn't completely cover those sorts of movement areas. So I understand that. But otherwise, you can kind of see there in the back where the articulation sort of pegs are. They are clean because the weathering is sort of done, I guess, prior to assembly, not after. Because, yeah, sometimes paint can kind of get in those sections and kind of really fuse things up. So yeah, the back, you can see that they are clean, but I'm loving just how grubby this guy looks. I love that. You can see the soles of the boots have a sculpted tread. We actually have two peg holes here. The standard ones for putting on a stand, and also second ones because there were pegs on the pedals of that original Black Series speeder bike vehicle. So sort of help him sort of put his feet on the pedals a little bit more securely. So if you're wondering why there are two peg holes, that is sort of a remnant from that vehicle. So I guess if you own the original vehicle, you could swap this one on it as well. If you like the paintwork on this one a little bit better than the figure that came with it, he should be able to sit on that just as easily. I guess that's one of the good things about having the same articulation, is this guy should be able to fit exactly onto previous releases of the speeder bike vehicle exactly the same, because he is the exact same sculpt, perhaps with just better paint job. I wish I had one of those original figures to paint the paintwork to compare side by side, but I don't. So you can see I really treasure finally having this one, because, you know, sometimes people have sort of, you have to prioritize figures in your collection. And I know that for a lot of collectors, the nostalgia is strong and they will stick with original trilogy as sort of a high priority and sort of go down the scale. So of course, something as iconic as an Empire character from Return of the Jedi is going to be pretty high up on people's wish lists, and they just look so cool. So I didn't get to see this one in person before I bought it. I was able to snatch this one during an online clearance sale, so I'm very relieved to see that the paintwork doesn't have any major flaws. Nothing looks broken. The visor and everything looks painted really nicely, because you know, if the visors, I noticed this on some Mandalorian characters, you know, because we don't really have faces for a lot of characters, it's the visors that are kind of the face of the character. So if they're just a little bit off, a little bit misaligned to the sculpting, it kind of looks a little bit off. So I'm very glad that I really like the paintwork on this figure. He looks great, and I don't have any kind of really sort of major flaws with paint where it shouldn't be. So absolutely fantastic. I really love the weathering touches around the abdomen and on the boots. Those look cool. Okay, I think I've gone over all of the paintwork. Of course, he's mostly black and white, but I love that weathering and sort of accent paints there, and just the fine detail around the helmet. Let's dive into the articulation. So of course, he's going to be very similar or familiar if you have older versions of this figure. One thing that I think is perhaps a little bit of a shame, and I don't think this would be too complicated to update, is the fact that we have the older style of articulation here at the neck as well. You can kind of see the slot there in the neck. It's a little bit black on black, but hopefully you can see that there. So he's very good at sort of looking up and down, but this is not a ball joint, so it's kind of a different feel if you're sort of moving them around. But it's not limiting the movement. He goes side to side very easily, all the way around if you really want to, and he does a pretty good job of looking up and down. Though of course, because there's a little bit of sort of a trim around the neck at the back of the helmet, that is just going to hit the sculpting here at the back. So he's not going to look up, but generally enough if you're going to put him on a speeder bike, because they kind of have to look a little bit more up in that sort of crouched position. But very nice movement there. Because yeah, I always think of them sort of looking around the forest, you know, chasing down Ewoks and rebels. I want them to sort of be able to turn their head a lot. And because they're designed to be more sort of posable than stormtroopers, because, you know, they've got to ride the vehicles. So we do have lots of cutouts around the armor plates. They don't actually have that much armor at all, really. We've got some on the legs, one shoulder piece, and this chest plate. And then technically, almost everything else is sort of fabric components with a little bit here on the back. So I'm hoping this means that he'll be reasonably flexible, especially if I did actually have a vehicle to pose him on. I'd want him to be able to really be able to sort of tweak all of those angles to get him to sit down. So just going to go in with this arm because that feels like that's the one that wants to move. So you can see that the shoulder plate here is actually going up over the shoulder straps. Sometimes they sort of hit straight in this gap, but this one is actually going over the top because it's kind of separate piece stuck onto the arm rather than being sculpted on it. So sometimes those sculpted all-in-one pieces just hit hard. This one has a lip because technically it's an attached piece, but it's not a floating piece. Sometimes they sort of have an attachment point or a little strap at the shoulder there, so they can kind of float around and you can move them a lot. This one is quite fixed. On the shoulder, it feels like that's sort of glued in with a peg style attachment under there. Just from what I can kind of see, I feel like there's a peg here, so it's not going to float around. It does kind of grind a little bit when I get it to here. That feels like where that's really stopping there, and I don't want to sort of flex that anymore. It's got a little bit of flex. You can kind of see I can sort of wiggle there at the corners, but it's not a really thin rubbery shoulder there. This one is a little bit more stiff. I'm just going to find the right yeah, this one's quite a lot more stiff actually. There we go. Just kind of getting him moving. And that's about as far up as I'm willing to go on that one, because that one's definitely hitting there. You can see just how the armor is going over the shoulder plate. So he's not going to go all the way straight up, but swinging wise, all the way around. I can get them reasonably close to his helmet. Perhaps if you want to sort of hoist him up on a tree, maybe the Ewoks have gotten him in one of their nets, but his arms can go up. I like that clearance there. So of course, if he was going to be holding a weapon, let's test out his elbow articulation. So the two pegs do give us that very deep articulation angle there. You can see the pegs there, which means I can get his hand all the way up to his helmet. So if he was calling on like a sort of a little communication device, I can get his hands up quite tight there. So that means that you should be able to sort of do some really good poses if you're going to be sort of running around your backyard with these guys. This one's a little bit tight. I often find that one of the pegs wants to move more freely than the other, and then it's taking a little bit of sort of encouragement to get that. I just want to see, yes, because this is an older figure, it's very well hidden in the black on black, but we do have a swivel point in the upper arm. So I'm hoping I can show that. So kind of in the bicep, in the wrinkles of the undersuit, there is a swivel point, so we can swivel the arms. Lots of movement here, so we can actually swivel them there on both sides. That's good. And of course we've got that deep elbow flex there. He could be eating a sandwich in the forest because he can get his hands all the way up. There isn't a swivel cut. There's kind of that sculpting detail at the end of the glove, but that is not an articulating point there. But yeah, let's test out those hands. So of course we can swivel them nice and easy. That's nice and free. And let's check out those sort of side to side motions. Yeah, that's quite a lot. You can see just how bent over to the side I can get that hand there, all the way to that side. A little bit clicky, but I do tend to find that pretty good. You can get a lot of movement there. And I gotta say, I forgot to mention this with the sculpting. They've got classic blaster grip hands, but both of them actually have the extended separate trigger finger. So instead of having all the fingers together, the trigger finger is separate and slightly extended to fit into the trigger guard on blaster accessories, which is quite fun. So he should be able to hold the blaster pistol in either hand. And I'm hoping we'll get a good grip there because the thumb is giving us a pretty good enclosed grip there, kind of like that. So I'm hoping because we've got really good movement in the arms, we'll get some cool blaster poses. Now, of course, when I'm moving the arms around, you can see that the chest is also really wanting to move. Stormtrooper armor and lots of Imperial armor are fantastic for hiding that sort of upper torso articulating point because we don't have it around the belt on very many figures. It kind of looks like there is a join here where these sculpted parts, because this is hard plastic and this is rubbery plastic, so technically there is a join there, but it is not where the figure is supposed to move. That is at this higher point. So forward and back, we've actually got more movement than I would think, and you can actually see all the way through and kind of see the attachment point there. But I was kind of expecting, sometimes you can be quite limited sort of crouching forward a little bit there because of these large pouches on the abdomen. So it's not a lot forward, but a lot back. We can actually get a lot more if I can move his arm out of the way. You can see just how much forward and back movement we can get there, though. If we tip him back, you are going to sort of expose the join there. If I tip him all the way forward, nothing's really being exposed here in the back. We've just got that fantastic sort of fabric sculpting there in the back. So let's test out the legs. So I was hoping that those rubbery sort of drop parts there were going to not really get in the way too much of the articulating movement. So if I was going to try and sort of sit him down, it's not a complete sort of right angle there. He's still leaning back a little bit, but he doesn't really sit in a cockpit like that. Of course, we're going to try and get him into sort of a seated position. And this is where I really wish that I had a speeder bike to test him on. But of course, I am checking out this figure, which doesn't come with one. So let's just bend that 2-pin articulation there in the knees. One of them, again, like the arms, one really wants to move. The other one needs a bit of encouragement, but we do get that extra deep articulating there. So you can sort of get his heel all the way up to his hip just about. It kind of catches just there. Just, it's not really sort of hitting on anything particular, but that's just where my figure wants to stop. Very high kick there in the back, and you can kind of see we do get a little bit of sort of the articulating sort of sections there exposed, but black on black does a pretty good job of hiding everything there. And we've got that kneecap armor just kind of floating there in the middle. So probably not going to be doing poses like that with him there, but it's always just kind of fun just to see the depth of movement there that we can achieve. And let's have a look. We do have a thigh swivel just in here, because of course we might want to sort of rotate his legs out a little bit to kind of get him fully straddled onto a vehicle, or just the poses that we might want to go with. If I sort of open his legs up to the side, you can see the sort of inner section in here, so you can see the articulating style there. Does pretty well going out to the side, but not sort of like full splits like I've seen some figures being able to do. And I don't know if that's, I don't think it's these sort of rubbery boxes that is limiting that. It just feels like my figure is not going to go any wider than that sort of angle there. But for everything else, pretty good movement that I'm able to get there, because the legs are going to be really important on a biker scout there, and I like those swivels. Some figures have very strong sculpted details down the legs, and as soon as you swivel at that thigh cut, sort of horizontal cut across, it completely interrupts the design on the legs and looks obviously kind of twisted. But with this sort of just fabric patterned pants, it does a pretty good job of hiding that line, especially black on black. It just kind of hides there. So I feel like you can really utilize this without kind of messing up the design on the legs. So you can sort of rotate the legs out a little bit to get that seated position on the speeder bike. So we tested out the sort of hips, upper thighs and knee. Let's just check out those ankles. You can really see the clean sections that are being exposed there. And we do have sort of a little bit of rotation there, side to side, to get that sort of real adjustment to get his feet on those foot pedals for the speeder bike. But yeah, a little bit clicky, but they hold in position. They don't feel floppy. And you can see the rotation there. We've just got those very clean sort of exposed sections. If I was going to put them more in a deeper sort of angle, that looks pretty good there. So let's see how well I can get him to stand up now that I've bent him all the which way. Pretty good. So now that I've fully tested out his articulation, let's just pop him to the side very briefly and take a closer look at the included accessory. It's a very small accessory, but basically if he doesn't come with a vehicle, this is the only other thing that he could possibly come with. And this is the very small Biker Scout little blaster pistol. It is so small. It's designed to fit inside the tiny little holster on the right boot there. So because it's so small, I'm hoping he's going to hold it well. It's not going to fall out of his hands. Now it's made in a black plastic. We've got some nice details there. There's nothing painted on this. It's very small. We've got an enclosed trigger guard. It's not circular, it's quite angular. We've got a tiny little sculpted trigger in there as well. I do quite like the little sort of spiky bits here because it actually feels quite sharp in some areas. This little end here is quite pointed, but it looks quite nice. I can't really expect to have more detail or anything else. It is what it is, you know, designed to be a replica of the prop from the film. So let's go in. Now it is black on black gloves. Hopefully this is going to look pretty cool when we get it in, because it's going to be a little bit hard to show the details. So I'm just hoping that we'll be able to get his trigger finger in here. So he holds it pretty well, but I have to say, if I get his arm out, it's kind of catching on his second finger here as well, because it's quite such a long trigger guard coming all the way to the bottom of the grip. I'm kind of catching the second finger in there as well, but it does actually hold in there. I didn't actually sort of notice that if I look at the hand on this side, I can actually get my fingernail in underneath that second finger, because that's kind of where the trigger guard has to go. So it's actually enclosing over those top two fingers, and the thumb is resting on the grip quite nicely. He's actually holding that quite securely. Now it's black on black, so it's a little bit hard to see, but I think that looks really good. That wasn't too hard to get into position. It's not a long one. Sometimes I find the long ones, you've really got to play around with the wrist to kind of get them holding at the angle that you really want. There's a lot of, you know, articulation that we can really sort of tweak the angles for this particular figure. Now, he doesn't look quite as cool, you know, as some of the other Imperial characters, because the blaster pistol's so small, but at least I do have something for him to hold because he doesn't have his vehicle. So it's a bit small, but he holds it really well. Let's quickly test it in the other hand. Now, of course, while we don't really see too many examples on screen, I'm sure there are some Imperials that are sort of, you know, left or right-handed. A lot of Star Wars characters hold their weapons in their right hand, but perhaps maybe you want to mix things up a little bit and have a character that's going to hold it in their left hand. This one feels like it should fit in about the same. There we go. Yeah, that goes in pretty much the same way. Just trying to show the detail there because it is black on black. Again, we get those top two fingers into the trigger guard. The thumb is resting there on the grip, and it fits in pretty much the same way. Looks really good. Nice. Okay, one last little piece to test. It's actually holding onto this quite securely, which is good. This is so small. This is the kind of thing that I get really worried is going to get dropped by a figure, bounce off and just get lost on the floor and, you know, accidentally sort of vacuumed up or swept away somewhere. So the fact that he holds onto this very small accessory makes me feel relieved. So you can kind of see the holster is not very deep on the Biker Scout, and that feels kind of accurate. It's kind of just like a little bit of sort of almost like a cup, just for sort of the end there. The grip and sort of the scope is fully exposed. So this is perhaps not quite as a secure storage spot. It does kind of just lift out very easily, but I don't like, I'd have to maybe shake him around a little bit to get that to fall out. It's not that loose. It's not just clacking straight out. So at least that's something. But yeah, if he had a speeder bike, I would probably have it in here tucked away. But because I don't, I've got something for him to hold to do a pose in, so I'm very glad about that. So he looks really cool. I've waited so long to add this guy to my collection. So of course I know he's been re-released quite a few times over the years, but I have to say I'm a little bit late to the Black Series collecting hobby. I have picked up figures, you know, off and on over the years. I have some from the original orange and blue stripe era, but I was very character focused back then and only got specific characters. It wasn't until the launch of the Mandalorian Black Series line that I really started diving in and adding all of the figures to my collection, because I guess still at heart I love the 3.75-inch line, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to kind of split my focus into the two lines. But figures like this, it's really exciting to finally being able to add this one to my collection, having missed the earlier versions. In saying that though, I do technically have one Black Series Biker Scout figure in my collection, which I have on hand here. So this one is from the Gaming Greats line. This is the Riot Scout Trooper from Jedi Survivor. So this one is pretty much the same figure as this one with some differences. It uses the same base Biker Scout figure with the older style of articulation, but you can see it's very white and clean. We don't have any weathering there on the lower section there on the boots and knee pads, and it's got this sort of harness here for sort of the electro staff weapon. So instead of the grey boxes around the abdomen, we have this harness here, and we've also got the sort of big sort of battery pack here on the back here as well. So if you maybe had this one and you wanted to try and customize it into an original trilogy figure, even if you cut off and removed the harness and the extra details, you're going to be missing those pouches that are present on the original trilogy version around that sort of a fabric cummerbund section there. So they are different. It would be very hard, not impossible, but hard to customize this one into this one, because I gotta say I was a little bit disappointed that I'd never been able to find this one, and I did maybe have hopes of, you know, maybe finding a second one of this to perhaps customize, but I didn't have to worry about that. I now have the proper version, and I gotta say I do like the weathering on the boots. I think that sort of really fits with Endor as for being the setting for the original trilogy version of the Biker Scout, but it's fun to sort of see these two side by side. A lot of similarities and a lot of differences. The sort of straps here holding those sort of hip boxes here, they are cream with silver buckles. This one just has black buckles. It's kind of interesting to see the paintwork here. The back section here is very different. We don't have those black accent lines, and it is silver there on the top. We also are missing a lot of those extra paint details on the helmet. Particularly if you sort of turn them around, you can see that this one's got all of the black striping and the painted details on the little hinge circle there, completely unpainted. So again, even if I could sculpt and add those grey boxes, I'd be having to add a lot of fine painted details to the helmet on this one here. Doesn't even have that sort of painted detail on this side either, but I think that they look cool. So for me personally, I'm not going to be having these two displayed side by side. This one's going to go in my Gaming Greats display, and this one's going to go in my original trilogy Return of the Jedi display. But it was just really fun to see them side by side finally. I've had this one for a little while. I can't believe I got this one before I was finally able to add this one to my collection. It's an older figure, but I really like the paintwork, especially since I've seen some of those older releases with the sort of slightly more split paintwork where the boots are muddy and then the rest of the sort of the leg armor isn't. I really like the weathering on my figure. I think he looks great. So of course I don't really have any other accessories to show with him. Of course, now that I've got this figure, I'm probably really crossing my fingers that perhaps we will get yet another re-release of the speeder bike. But even if Hasbro doesn't release it, I'm probably going to have to track down one of those older releases, because it really does need an extra one, because I love the way that you can army build Imperials. So I can have this one sort of, you know, ready to chase down Ewoks, and one in the background on a speeder bike, because he's so cool. This has been a lot of fun. Even with the older articulation style, with his elbows being up, I don't see those pegs in the elbows quite as badly. They are black on both the arms and the legs, so they're not cutting into details quite as badly as they do for other characters, which is a great relief there. So he is so cool. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today as I opened up another Black Series 6-inch scale figure and had a lot of fun checking out the details. I hope you have a wonderful morning, afternoon, or evening wherever you are in the galaxy, and let's hang out again for some Star Wars fun very soon. May the Force be with you. If you're a Black Series fan, I've also unboxed the Archive Emperor Palpatine figure. That video is linked here in case you haven't already seen it, as well as a whole Black Series unboxing playlist. This is the way.